Welcome to Dine and Dish, the podcast where hospitality meets real talk. I'm your host, Michelle DeMeo, Restaurant Diva, serving up the stories, strategies, and behind-the-scenes truths of the restaurant business. All right, everyone, we are back for another episode of Dine and Dish, and we've had so many amazing topics, and they just keep going. And today we're going to talk revenue and profits, and which we all know in the restaurant business, that's what we're here for, is to find that hidden revenue and see where we can be effective and efficient and drive that front line. And today we have an amazing guest on with over 20 years in hospitality. But I'm going to let Geoff explain what he does and where he comes from and talk about Frontline Performance Group. And are you on the line with us today?
I am. It's great to be with you, Michelle. Thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. Well, welcome to Dine and Dish. And we're excited to jump right into this conversation today because obviously we all know the restaurant industry is such a tough industry, especially today. And making sure that these restaurants make it in today's world. I mean, we all know, my God, it's like 80+% fail. And so to talk about success and frontline performance and what we do to find and drive profits and revenue is huge. So why don't you open up the show with your background, who you are, the company you work for, and why you're an expert in this field.
That would be great. Yes. So my name is Geoffrey Toffetti, or Geoff, as most people call me. Currently CEO of Frontline Performance Group. Been with the company 15 years. And before that, I started my career in hospitality, working at a resort, starting as valet and working my way up to director of guest services, and then had a break in between where I worked in a completely different industry for 12 years. And then came to FPG 15 years ago with the mandate of bringing the company into hospitality because of my background. Traditionally, the company had worked with automotive companies and some other, a smattering of other industries. And with my background, I was like, this is a perfect application. So what Frontline Performance Group does and has always done is work with our clients to activate performance at the front line. Particularly where revenue is in play, where that interaction between the frontline employee and the guest can result in a greater degree of revenue. So if you think about, hotel front desk is a no-brainer. We work with about 3,000 hotels and front desks. But also we've worked in theme parks in, when you're selling tickets, or in now our most recent industry that we're really focused on is food and beverage and restaurants and bars specifically. To basically just, how do you activate the front line to get them to engage the guests, more assertively and generate more revenue. And we deliver that through a technology platform that gives our customers an unprecedented degree of insight into what's actually happening at the server bartender level, as well as an interface for the servers and bartenders so they can see how they're doing and engage with training that is tailored to their specific opportunities. So it's a really interesting place to be where, we're not necessarily menu experts, we're not operations experts, but we're experts at the front line and what that interaction with the guest can result in when done really well.
Yeah. So you brought up 3 points. And before we jump into the nitty gritty of finding that revenue and training, we just filmed an episode and we talked all about growing up in the restaurant business and what hospitality really does for your background and your skills and your experience. And I love the fact that you started in hospitality and you worked in so many different roles, whether it was hotels or restaurants, because it's such a great background and to build those skills and to be able to take that into entrepreneurial levels. And that's one of the focuses for our show for the next couple months is, looking for the younger group and, these younger kids that want to get into these entrepreneurial roles and starting in hospitality. So that's such a key piece. And I love the fact that you brought that up, and you've worked in with a lot of big brands with hotels and restaurants, but training is such a big piece. And that was the second topic you mentioned. And I want to kind of jump into that for a minute and talk about training, because you know as well as I do, and being a restaurateur, that's probably our hardest piece. You know, bringing the bartenders in and the servers in, and really streamlining that training piece hands on. And why don't you talk a bit about your training process, how you hold them accountable, how you execute it from not only a entrepreneurial level from your company, but also from an owner standpoint, from a restaurateur side. If we can start there, that would be amazing.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and we've always said that training is just a small part of the equation, the performance equation. Because if you're training an uninterested group, they're not going to apply what you're training. And if it's not reinforced through accountability, which you mentioned, which I'm happy you did, if there's no accountability to it, then the training is basically going to result in almost nothing. You'll see, we see it all the time. You take people into training, you look at them a month or 2 months later, and none of them are doing it, because training itself is only a component of what is necessary. It's the reinforcement, it's the accountability, and probably the most important word is the expectation. So, from an owner standpoint, or let's say a manager slash owner standpoint, the first thing that has to be in place in order to get any benefit out of training is an expectation. So what do you expect them to do, and then train to that expectation, because you could be giving, as an example, you could be giving 5 diamond service training, but you're only a 3 diamond establishment, and you don't expect them to deploy that 5 diamond training. Well, then it's wasted. So the approach we take is we measure for, well, first we measure
Mhm.
what is happening today, and our favorite metric in the restaurant business is revenue per guest. What is the revenue per guest performance now at the server level? Why is it different among them? And there'll always be a top and a bottom. But what is it that comprises an individual person's revenue per guest? What is it that makes someone better or worse than someone else? And when you understand what it is, then you tailor training to that thing. So for instance, if you have servers that are really good at selling appetizers, they have a very high throughput on appetizers, but they never sell desserts. You don't want to force them into training that talks about appetizers, because they're just going to tune out. It's not going to apply to them. But if you show them that they're losing money in their tip average and their revenue per guest average because they're never selling dessert, and they could make more money if they sold more dessert, then they're going to be interested in how to sell more dessert. So that's a simplification, but essentially it's, what is happening? What do you want to have happen? Set those expectations and then tailor the training specifically to the server. Now, where has been historically very difficult is to put that information into the hands of a restaurant manager,
Mhm.
where they don't have to go looking for it. They can say, okay, Tommy is good at appetizers, bad at desserts, and Mary is great at desserts and never sells an add-on, never modifies the dish, whatever. That information is difficult to come by. So that's one of the things that we're bringing to the market, is that's visualized very simply, and the information is provided to the managers through the technology, so they don't have to go and be data mining experts. They can just say, I need to work on this with these people, and I need to work on this with this people. And by the way, here's a bunch of digital training that addresses those individual deficits. So managers can really just focus on being there for the team, setting positive expectations, and then getting them to use the system. Now, if you don't have a system, which many don't, obviously, because we're,
Mhm.
we're bringing it out,
Mhm.
it's really try to figure out what each person is good at. And a really easy way to address it is to pair them off with people who have the opposite strength to them, and let them work together for a week or two to focus on their strengths and weaknesses. That way, it's very organic, and it's real time, and it's happening, and it becomes a habit. Within a couple of weeks, habits form. So that's a big part of it. Is if you can't get them in the classroom, know what they're good at or what they're struggling with, and then pair them off with each other and give them an expectation. We need you to sell XYZ worth of this, and you're not. So we're going to pair you with this person so you can work on that.
Yeah. So, two things that you said are very important. Let's start with 3-star versus 5-star service. One of the challenges that we had, I mean, we opened up a very vibey, fancy, full service restaurant. And when you look at a menu and you look at a high ticket menu, let's say you're selling steaks over $100, your average ticket, like you talked about, ticket per guest is probably $90 or $100 per person. The expectation from the guest is definitely much higher than when you go into like a Fridays or a Whole Hands where your ticket per guest is maybe $30 or $40. I mean, the guest expectation is very different. So they look at, okay, well, I'm only expecting 3-star service. But now you go to a steakhouse, a high-end steakhouse, where they're expecting 5-star service. So that's an interesting aspect to talk about because you're setting a guest expectation. So obviously the training and what goes into that training is so much more detailed. I mean, we talked about that probably 1,000 times when we opened Tuscan Prime because the guest is already coming in expecting perfect service. So being able to train and execute that is so important. So I agree there. And one of the things I always say, and Steve hears it all the time, I always say numbers are end result of behavior. So if
Mm-hmm.
the numbers are not where they need to be and you're not hitting those ticket numbers or you're losing revenue, you have to look at behavior. And then it goes back into what you just said, setting expectation and training with the managers to be able to roll out and get to the end result, which is your numbers, right?
100%.
Yeah.
Yes. And the when we look at the service levels of training, there's sort of, and I think you'll agree with this, there is like a foundational layer of service that should be present regardless of what you're selling. And then how like five diamond service might be like you deliver the food on the right side of the guest, and there's an extra this and that, and you have to stand in a certain position. Like those kind of over the top levels are completely unnecessary in a casual dining place. But attentiveness, responsiveness, replenishment, speaking clearly, knowing your menu, like all these things are fundamental. And here's something funny, haha, not really, kind of like disturbing, but funny to us because we started gathering data from all the restaurants that we're working in. And one of the things we realized was when new hires start, it is very common to pair them with a trainer, the
Hmm.
designated trainer, for like 3 days, 5 days, whatever.
Right.
But when we started looking at the sales per guest level of the people they're shadowing, they often are like in the middle of the pack. So when you bring someone in new into your environment, not you, but in general,
Hmm.
if you pair them with someone who doesn't sell well,
Hmm.
you're literally setting yourself up for failure because that person is going to see that as the expectation. This is how, I don't have to offer anything proactively. I don't have to recommend. And that's where data is so important is you can have the friendliest, best employee who's always on time, their uniform's perfect, but their sales numbers are lackluster. And if you have them training your new hires, you're kind of setting yourself up onto a treadmill where you're constantly fighting against those numbers, which I agree 100% are a reflection of behavior.
Right.
If the sales numbers are low, chances are your servers aren't engaging the guests the way you want, and they're not presenting your best products. I'll give you a real example. This just happened to me recently. I was at a dinner at a very fancy restaurant, and I was with very wealthy private equity people. And this restaurant was known for this imported steak that comes in every day. It flies across the world. It's unbelievable. It's $200. And we're sitting around the table, and the server never mentioned the signature steak.
Wow.
And I'm sitting there. You can imagine I scrutinize everything that happens to me, and I pointed out to the private equity guys. I'm like, "Did you see that? Like they never offered it, and this is a table full of people that could easily buy it,
Right.
and probably would have at least one." And it's that kind of thing that is, I think, as a restaurant manager, restaurant owner, that's going on in your organization, and it's very hard to pinpoint where that's breaking down and address it. But if you can, that's when you can strive for excellence, because you want that signature steak coming out of every server's mouth with every table. It's, but how do you make sure that they're doing it? How do they motivate them to do it? And then how do you train them to do it?
Yeah. So there's three issues. I'm going to talk from the restaurateur side. So the first issue with training, absolutely, the manager always puts the server with who they feel is the best person to shadow. The problem is your top performer never wants to be the trainer because it takes away from their time. It takes away from the ability for them to make more money, to engage with the guest. So you're absolutely right. They take the person who they feel is going to give that new trainee the most time. And that's not your top performer. It never is. It's also hard to get your best people to want to train. So there has to be some kind of an incentive that you give to them to say, hey, you're our top performer, you're our highest revenue performer, you be the best person to train. What type of an incentive can you give them so they want to do it? So that's the first challenge. The second, where you talked about upselling, for example, desserts, coffees, high-end drinks. If the restaurant is making the server make them, prepare them, put them together, and let's say this is a very busy restaurant where they have to turn tables, the last thing they want to do is run and make a dessert, make a cappuccino. I know from firsthand during, very busy service nights on a Friday, Saturday night, if the server has to make the cappuccino or the coffee, they're not going to do it.
Yeah, they're never going to sell it.
They don't want to do it. So it's coming up with the right system from the restaurant side to, again, incentivize them to upsell, but not have them make it. So, it's creating the system from the restaurant side as well as the operation side to be able to turn the interaction from the guest and the server into measurable revenue, right? And then the third piece, which I've seen, and we used to have these real high end steaks, and we used to do these huge with the big tomahawk steaks, and we used to engrave the steaks, and so we had some servers that were like, yeah, revenue, bigger check, bigger tips. Of course, what's in it? Everybody beats to the WIIFM, what's in it for me? But the problem was then you have other servers in their mind, they're thinking to themselves, wow, that's a really expensive ticket. Can I sell that? So, again, how do you change these different behaviors? I mean, obviously, you're talking about systems, and we'll get to systems in just a minute and how you can implement the system for the restaurateur and the manager. But how do they then take it down to actually change these frontline behaviors?
Yeah, so you've hit on a couple of really essential points. One, I'm trying to address them all. So one, the top
I'm going to
performer
throw a lot of things at you.
yeah, no, that's great. I love it because I often don't get detailed tactical questions like that. So the question you're asking, the top performers don't want to train, you have to give them an incentive. 100%. So if I'm looking at it and I say, what is the difference between a top third and a bottom third server in revenue per guest? And we're seeing that it's about, it's probably 20%, 25%. And so you're saying to yourself, okay, how much will it cost me to have someone come in to the middle of the pack versus the top of the pack?
Mm-hmm.
And that number is probably tens of thousands of dollars per year. So if you say to your top performer, I'm going to give you $500 or $1,000 to train this person for 3 days, but your job is to let them see how you construct your checks. How do you present your steaks? How do you position your appetizers? And they're going to get $1,000. That sounds like a lot of money, but it's not. It's nothing compared to the loss you could suffer if someone comes in the middle of the pack rather than being held to that higher standard. But
Right.
it all starts with doing that calculation. Look at your average new hires over the last 6 months. What is their revenue per guest? What is your top performer?
Mm-hmm.
What is the differential? It's very simple to come up with a number that's going to be interesting to the top performer. And as far as the training portion of how do you get people to actually do something different, first of all, is you have to know what it is you want them to do differently,
Mm-hmm.
and be able to articulate it to them in a way that makes sense. So to your point, if you have to make the coffee and you're busy, you're not going to make the coffee. And I agree. There's another exercise in
Hmm.
how many coffees do we want to sell? What is the profit on those? We should probably hire someone in high school to make coffee, right? And rather than have your servers doing it. But that's not me. I'm not an operations person, so I can't really speak to that.
Hmm.
But as far as like, positioning things so that you can offer them appropriately and consistently, that's really just what is the priority for the restaurant. So if selling desserts, like for instance, if you tend to have a long dinner service and you don't necessarily want to sell a lot of dessert because it's going to take up a lot of time and you want to turn your tables, then come up with a way to send them home with dessert, and give them the dessert move them out of the restaurant. And that servers could position that at the beginning of the meal. Like, I know you guys you're going to love this meal, but we have this cake that is unbelievable and everyone wants it, but you're going to be full. So let me package it for you on your way out. Those kind of things are the things that a highly engaged server will probably do on their own because they're constantly thinking, how do I maximize my check? Versus it being systemized where you can train that across all your servers and say, this is what you do on busy nights. This is what you do when the bar is slammed.
Right.
Like, one of the things we came up with just from observation in the data is, if it's a really busy night, when you greet your table, ask them if automatic replenishment interests them. When your meal comes, do you want me to automatically replenish your drinks? We're seeing like 70% say yes. You've automatically sold your second round of drinks and you don't have to overwhelm the bar. You can kind of plan
Oh, I
for it. So
love that.
yeah, there's a
I,
lot of that
that's a
coming right
great
out of the
that's a
data.
great tip for restaurateurs because there's a couple things, not to cut you off, but there's a couple things that they're doing now, and that's more restaurant operations. And I don't want to get too far into that, or we're gonna we're gonna go such a tangent. We're not even gonna cover everything we want to talk about. But I mean, where they now say, all right, they come to the table and they'll say, well, we want to put the entire order in. So this way we can course it. It's great for the kitchen. It's all timely. But now if they can add that one step that says, do you want auto replenishment? Do you want another second drink, or do you want wine with your dinner? I mean, that's a great tip for restaurateurs. Then one, you're upselling, you're not interrupting the guests during conversation. Three, it's automatic. The second the food hits the table, they know to automatically bring that next round of drinks. I love that. It's a great tip.
Yeah, because when you think about service too, one of the biggest deficits we're seeing in service is this sort of no man's land between the dinner arrives and they want to try and sell you a dessert, and what happens is they're gone,
Right.
and the party's looking for their next drink because it's run out in the middle of dinner, and they're looking around and the servers in the back are doing something else, and it's like this space in there where there's an entire opportunity to sell that we're seeing in a lot of cases isn't being utilized. And the biggest revenue impact that we're seeing on the check level is the replenishment rate of the drinks, particularly in the dinner service. If the difference between 2 drinks and 3 drinks can be 20-25% of the revenue of the check. And what happens is, here's another, again, this is born out of the data, is if you get the drink in their hand as soon as they sit down, you offer them an automatic replenishment, there's a good chance you're going to get a third order
Mm-hmm.
before the end of dinner. If you wait, if you do waters and then bread and then appetizers and then drinks, you're only going to sell 2 at most. So that's a very significant revenue, and it's a service problem. I'm a drinker. I like to drink. I want to drink when I sit down,
Mm-hmm.
and my wife wants her wine. We don't want to wait. And then if you're waiting and then you can't find your server to replenish it, it can be a negative. But if you do it automatically and you set the stage at the beginning, you can do both. You can sell an extra round and you can exceed the expectation of the guest.
Yeah. So where do you, I mean, besides the drink and replenishments, where do you feel the hidden losses are? Like, where are the biggest hidden losses during the dinner service? I mean, is it replenishment? Is it training? I mean, is it what teams are not doing? I mean, and how much revenue do you really feel is left on the table? I mean, because obviously you have data points on any given night.
Yeah. So, and there was this question also answers a question that you mentioned before that I forgot to address.
Yeah.
The server applying their wallet to the guest. This is something we've been working to overcome for
That's a
33
huge
years.
one.
It's a huge one because we've trained people to sell $2,000 products and they make $7 an hour, or used to make. They probably make $11 an hour now.
Hmm.
So we've had to overcome this for a long time. And that's basically the way to do it, is to constantly reinforce, do not assume the people coming in here make what you make. They might make $500,000 a year and they're here to have the best steak in town and they want to spend $200 on a tomahawk. Like that that's something that just has to be constantly reinforced. And then and a good way to do it is to have a contest where you recognize people who sell the most of a particular high-end item. Because once they try it and it works and they sell it, it's going to start to build their confidence.
Yeah.
So from a hidden revenue standpoint, I would say, aside from the drinks are the biggest bleeding source of revenue that we're seeing, particularly in dinner, but even in lunch. It's going to be the top end entree items. It's going to be the more expensive, or the modifications to the entree that add that extra 10 or
Hmm.
15%. And again, that's why it comes back to this confidence thing. If you know that steak is spectacular, or let's say there's let's get away from steak for a minute. Let's say you have this really high end, lobster roll, and it's absolutely delicious, and you love eating it, then you've got to be able to communicate that to the guests, regardless of whether it's $40 or not. And that's where we're seeing there's a mindset difference between a top performer and a middle or low performer. The top performer views themselves as a salesperson. The bottom performer views themselves as an order taker. And they're just going to assume the guest knows what they want, and they're just going to take whatever they order, and that's it. And that the difference between those two things is trainable and is also at the discretion of the individual. We have a concept we call discretionary effort. And a lot of what you've been talking about and what I've been talking about is rooted in the discretionary effort of the server. And for a lot of them, what we're seeing is they don't know how bad it's hurting their wallet,
Hmm.
because it's not being translated into, you've left $6,000 on the table with the same guests. You're working the same hours, but you're making 6,000 less than you could.
Yeah.
When you start to think that way, all of a sudden you see it in their eyes. We're working with, we see them go, oh, I didn't realize that. I thought I was doing okay. And so the biggest mind shift, I think, for managers and owners is servers and bartenders too, they should be viewed as revenue centers. They should be viewed as a business unit,
Of course.
because they are a business unit. And you wouldn't, if you had three restaurants and one was just doing horribly and the other one was doing okay and one was doing great, you wouldn't be like okay with the horrible performance. But when you have servers, you have 10 servers working, oftentimes there are some that are significantly below average, and it's just hard to see it. It's hard to know it unless you're constantly analyzing it.
Yeah.
So on the question of missed revenue, what we're seeing, we rank everything on leaderboards. So when we're taking revenue per guest, and we're looking at breakfast, lunch, dinner services separately, what we're finding consistently is between 18 and 22% revenue left on the table.
Wow.
That's same guests, same servers, same menu, same shift. There's a 18 to 22% revenue loss that we believe should be captured. And that doesn't even include the top performers getting better. That's just looking at the performance of the actual checks. So when we look at the profitability of most restaurants, 22% revenue would double their profit in most cases.
Yeah.
Sometimes quadruple it, depending on the
Yeah.
restaurants you're looking at. So yeah, it's very material, very significant, and totally addressable.
Yeah. So let's talk the process. So a company hires, or a restaurant hires your company. What does that process look like? How do you go into the restaurant? How do you identify where the issues are? Because obviously they're different in every restaurant. Or do you see very similar trends, so you know already where you're going to attack those behaviors and the direct issues at hand? And then from there, talk about, you mentioned server confidence, you mentioned product knowledge, and how you change that check average, and and work with these servers. Because I mean, obviously it's train the trainer, right? You have a manager, you have to kind of get the manager on board first, because it's not the owner if they're going to have multiple brands. So talk through that process and that whole identification, and then from there you have these data points to get to those end results that we discussed.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal question. I appreciate it very much. So Um, Essentially, the process goes like this. First, we get the data out of the point of sale system. We get that tested and flowing so that the system is now receiving the data that it needs. Then we meet with the leadership of the outlet or the restaurant or bar, and we get them on board with the idea of what this is going to do.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, then we actually perform a training for the servers. It's done virtually, so it's like a webinar. It's not very long, and the intention of that is to wake them up to the idea that there's a lot, they're leaving money on the table, not just for the business but for themselves, and show them the application and how it works. It's very simple. They have it on their mobile phone. They can see exactly what's happening in their performance and where they are on the leaderboard. And then after 1 week, the system actually has integrated artificial intelligence, and what it does is it actually goes into every server and analyzes the construction of their checks relative to the top performers, and it pinpoints exactly what each server needs to work on first as the biggest priority, and then it assigns them training that is engineered to address those deficits. So if someone's deficit is appetizer frequency, then they're going to get training on appetizers. If someone is drink replenishment, then they're going to get training on drink replenishments. And every week, a report goes to the manager that is very natural language that says, this is what you can address in the coming week to address all these revenue deficits. And some of it is scheduling, some of it is pairing people, like I mentioned before.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it is the training that's assigned. Some of it is coaching the manager on what to say to someone, to point out what their opportunities are. And the system has other features that again are in there because of working with restaurants. They've given us this feedback. One of them is goal setting. So you can imagine how handy it would be to be able to set a goal on these different KPIs and have it tracked it for every server, and the servers can see it,
Mm-hmm.
and how they're performing to their goal. And then you can actually put incentives on the goals. So you can say, let's say that your average revenue per guest is $80 and you want it to be 90. You set the goal at 90. Well, anything between 90 and 100, you're going to give them 2%. Everything from 100 to 110, you're going to give them 5%. And it's all tracked and calculated and visible through the system. So now the manager has a way to communicate to every server a metrics-driven expectation, but also be giving the servers the training they need to get to those numbers, so that it's not just sell more. It's,
Right.
here's how you sell more of what we need you to sell more of. And what we're finding is, as soon as the servers realize two things: where they rank on the leaderboard and how much money they're leaving on the table, they get really interested in learning. And those that don't, and after, we've been working with restaurants over a year now, some restaurants, and the servers that never get on board are the ones you need to replace. That's just the bottom line, because they're not getting on board with your expectations and they're not performing. But what we're finding is the vast majority are jumping on board and increasing at a pretty significant pace. And it's funny because as they increase, the leaderboard still has a top and a bottom. So there's always this sort of push up in the natural order of things, where even if they're improving, there's more to improve, and it's all relative to the people actually working there. So we go in, we train, we support the managers, we give all the technology, and then we're touching base with the managers, and we're sending them their AI Insights report every week, and it's telling them in very simple terms exactly what they need to do to get that extra revenue.
Yeah. So I have to tell you, every show that I do, AI comes up. I mean, I can't
Yep.
tell you, there hasn't been one show in a year that AI hasn't been mentioned. And it's amazing that now we're using artificial intelligence to train people. It used to be
It's
people training people, now it's AI's training people. But I think it's super cool that you can actually identify individually where the strengths and the weaknesses are. So, if a server isn't strong in selling liquor, isn't strong in selling desserts. So it's actually it's not just grouping overall training. Because, sometimes you go to these trainings and you're in these big workshops and they talk in general.
Hmm.
information, and you can see the ones that kind of zone out, and then you see the ones that are totally, energetic and excited, and those are the ones that you kind of gear your conversation towards. So I love the fact that it's individual. Now my question to you is this: because it's individual and it's on their phones, are you seeing the same results versus being, face to face and person to person and being able to touch and feel? Because you have some learners that learn better on the job and hands on, and then you have others that, watching a webinar. Are you seeing, what's the results that you're seeing versus, this shift to the computer trainings?
Yeah. So pre-COVID, our business was going on site and doing trainings.
Right.
And in some cases, we would embed people there and they would show up like once a week or twice a week. And we weren't able to do that during COVID. So it kind of forced us to move to this virtual training model. And what we have found is that, pound for pound at the transaction level, our clients are doing better in the current model than they did before. Primarily, we believe, because when you rely on a trainer to come in or a
Mhm.
consultant to come in, everyone's waiting for them to arrive in order to do stuff. Whereas, so you have this heartbeat. You have this, the results go up and then the results go down, and then they show back up and the results go up again and then they go back down. But what we're seeing now is, because it's embedded into the culture of the group and it is at an individual level, we're seeing a more consistent performance. Now, the reason that we have a multimodal process where some of what we're recommending is pairing people up and having them peer train each other. Some is manager engagement directly with people. Some is scheduling, putting people on the right shifts at the right time, and then some is digital training. So it's hitting a variety of different, style types that people respond to, and it's giving them a lot of different ways to address their deficits. Um, Ultimately, though, it does come down to the culture that the manager is establishing. If the manager establishes a culture where learning is good and we're going to recognize people who improve, and we're a team and we're here to achieve a goal, then they're going to have a ton of success. If you have a culture where servers are sort of a necessary expense and they're not viewed as a critical component of the success of the restaurant, then you're probably going to struggle to get anything done. So, and we see both of those things and the whole spectrum in between in real time. So we spend a lot of our time up front when we're selling, to people, convincing them that servers and bartenders are driving your profit. Like, it's not an afterthought, because, like, this is the example I give frequently. You could have a dive bar on the beach that only sells $15 hamburgers, and you could have a fine dining steakhouse right up the road. And pound for pound, that dive bar could do better
Mhm.
relative to itself than the fine dining steakhouse, because the servers are lighting it up, the guests love them, they're engaging them, they're selling to them, and the others are standing by waiting for the guests to order. And it's just cultural. It's what is the culture of the front of the house. So that's a big part of it, and we help with that too, because metrics open managers' eyes quite a bit to what the opportunities are.
Yeah. So we're going to definitely have to do a part two, because leadership and training and culture and everything we're talking about today is just so top of mind for me. I mean, I could sit here and pick your brain for the next 3 hours and ask you questions, and you would say, "Oh my God, I'm getting grilled by Michelle." But
No, I love it. I love it.
we definitely. I mean, we're running out of time already, and I haven't even asked you my 30 other questions I need to do. But before we do that, talk about, you mentioned culture, and before we get into, I have some lightning round quick questions for you. But how do you build, you culture is such a hard thing to create, and leadership plays such a huge role, owners play such a huge role. But from a trainer perspective, how do you build that culture that will embrace the accountability? Because of course you always say numbers and data is the end result. So how do you build that when you're training these teams?
Yeah, so it's one of my favorite subjects. I think largely Frontline Performance Group is a culture company. That's our history, because you can't affect change without affecting culture. So there's three things when you're dealing with frontline staff. There's three things that will elicit a change of behavior. One is accountability, one is recognition, and one is reward. So if you don't have your management team, if the managers don't have tools that address all three of those, then you're going to struggle to build a culture.
Hmm.
So, accountability doesn't have to be punitive. It just means everyone is aware of how they're doing and how that impacts the team. Recognition is as simple as recognizing the right kind of behaviors, not even necessarily the right outcomes, but the right behaviors. And then reward is an opportunity for them to, monetary reward of some kind, the what's in it for me. So when you have all three of those functioning together, then you can start to build a culture. Now, how do you build a culture? Well, I think culture is innate to every group of people, but how do you go from a bad culture to a good culture,
Right.
which I think is really what you're asking,
Exactly. Yep.
is it, in my opinion, it always starts with the leader. And a lot of leaders don't like to hear this, but it's, have you established trust as a leader? And the biggest problem that I see, and this goes back centuries, I think, is leaders that treat people as if they have to earn the leader's trust or earn the leader's respect. That is fundamentally a broken mindset, because when you say to someone, you have to earn my trust, what you're saying is, I don't trust you.
Hmm.
And when you tell someone that you don't trust them, they're not going to trust you back. Now you're starting off in an environment of mistrust. So if the leader says the opposite, if they say, I hired you, I trust you, you've got all the talent you need, I trust you completely, that changes the whole tempo, the whole relationship. And then you can hold them accountable, because you can say, I trusted you and you let me down, rather than, see, I told you I couldn't trust you, and you're demoralizing them. So it really, we could have a whole episode on this. This is
Yeah.
probably my greatest strength, but it just comes down in one word: trust. You have to give trust freely in order to receive it back. And that's when you can start asking people to do things differently.
Yeah. So I, I agree with you. We could talk a whole nother show on culture and training and leadership. And I mean, I love the fact that you're bringing a training perspective, and I have the restaurateur perspective. So putting the two together, it's just such amazing, valuable information to everybody listening. And for everybody listening on today's show, I mean, obviously you know where to find us. DMs are always open on Instagram. You can reach me through restaurantdiva.com. We're on LinkedIn. We're always looking for amazing guests, amazing topics. And today's show has been, I love it. I think the topic's been amazing. Our guest today is just bringing such incredible insight and information that could be used not only in the restaurant industry, but I mean, across all industries. And that's one of the things that, when we started the show, we talked about it. I mean, your company started in hospitality with hotels. I mean, when I was doing the research, most of your clientele was, this whole technology piece in hotels, and now, moving it into the restaurant space. But before we get into my lightning round quick questions for you, can you talk a little bit about this product? You're saying that you have this technology. Is the technology integrated into the POS systems? Is it a separate technology? I mean, how does that technology work? I mean, obviously we know there's AI integrated pieces to it, but how does the restaurateur use this? And is it something they have to, you know, use your company to integrate, to install, or is it something that works right hand in hand with their operating systems?
Yeah, it's a great question. It sits alongside the point of sale system. We take the data out of the point of sale system and we bring it into our platform, which then allows us to extract all of the intelligence and the tools that we give to the managers so that they can, affect revenue and guest experience. So it sits next to. It's not in the workflow per se,
Hmm.
but it's also a light application. So there's not a lot that managers need to do. We're actually kind of pushing the data to the managers so that they can then action it. There are certainly dashboards and there's a graphical interface that is both web and mobile, but the AI insights reports that we're sending to the managers don't require them to look at the UI. They can read it, and it literally says things like, Tom needs to work on his appetizers, pair him with Fred because Fred is your leader there. It's written like that because what we're doing is we're taking this huge data set out of the point of sale system, we're running it through a normalization process, and then we're letting the AI extract from that the meaningful patterns that will affect performance. So it doesn't require a lot of work on the manager's part. We think it's probably 15 to 30 minutes a week
Mm-hmm.
of time to implement the solution, which is how do you get servers to sell more stuff? It's not 30 minutes to use the technology, it's 30 minutes to affect the revenue.
Wow. So, does this technology also work with fast casual, or is it mostly focused on full service where you have servers and bartenders and individual employees?
It works anywhere that there's more than one employee. So we have it working in marketplaces, in hotels. We have it working in counter sales and some fast casual. We haven't gone into fast food, although theoretically it works because we'd pull the data out, it'd measure each person on their shift, how many items per check they're selling, what is their average revenue per guest.
Mm-hmm.
It all of the same scenarios work. The only thing that might be lacking in fast food right now is the training content might not be specific enough, but we definitely are serving fast casual.
Right. Also, now with a lot of the fast casuals, they're going to these kiosk programs where the guest is actually the server or the employee because they're putting in their own meals. So it'd be
Mhm.
interesting to see how you can drive guests based on how the kiosk and the POS is programmed to entice them to order more themselves, almost upsell themselves.
Right. And that's an area that I think in our future, we're looking at trying to provide uh, intelligence back to the kiosk
Right.
on how do you order things, rank them, how do you position them. That's probably a future state. But one thing that I would say is if you have a top performer human versus a kiosk, the human will win every time. Where the kiosk wins is in consistency.
Yeah.
So when it makes sense in some cases to have a kiosk. Certainly you don't want to have a kiosk when you have a complex menu or you have a bar, because you're just missing opportunities left and right.
Yeah. Well, kiosks really only perform best in a small menu, fast casual setting. I mean, we only use them in our BB's Chicken and Mac because obviously it's a small menu. It's easy. It's easy to order. You don't have a ton of modifications. When especially if the POS is not very user friendly. So you have to have a good operating system, and then the kiosk obviously is easy for the guest to use. All right, here's my lightning round quick questions for you before we end our
Okay.
show today. One KPI every operator should track on a daily basis:
Revenue per guest.
revenue per guest.
And not count on the check or the cover. Make sure that the servers are entering the number of guests per check. That's really your indication of quality of sales.
Most underrated revenue driver.
Drink replenishment.
I love that. I'm gonna stick with that. I mean, every full service restaurant we do, I'm gonna say, all right, do we want auto drinks? I love that. That's one thing I've not thought of, so I love that one. Biggest mistakes owners make.
Is thinking of their servers as an expense rather than a revenue center.
Training or culture, which matters more to you?
Culture.
Yeah, I agree. Culture is so important because you can always train if you have a great culture.
And if you have a great culture, you almost can trust your people to do the right thing. They can figure out their own way. You give them a goal and you give them the right culture, they'll figure it out. But if you don't have a good culture, you could train them all day long and they're not going to get it right.
Yeah. And what's your one, let's leave all the listeners today with your one piece of advice for restaurant operators today that are looking really to find the hidden revenue, train better, build culture. What would be your piece of advice for them?
The simplest thing that you could do to hit on all of those is to have a leaderboard. Go into your point of sale system, pull out the reports you have access to, figure out on revenue per guest would be my recommendation in the absence of that revenue per check, and then put it up on the wall and let everyone see how they rank on that metric. Because yes, it might seem harsh for the people at the bottom, but the people at the bottom are costing you $10, $15 per guest. But for the people in the middle and the upper, it's going to reward them because they're going to feel good about it. And it's going to create an incentive for people to want to move up the leaderboard. So that would be the simplest thing. You do it once a week, you stick it up on the wall, and maybe come up with a prize for someone who improved the most week over week. That would be my advice.
Yeah. And for the listeners, Geoff, where can they find you or find out more about FPG? If they want to find out more about your technology and your training, where can we find you?
Absolutely. So on the web, of course, www.frontlinepg, like performancegroup.com. And we have a ton of information up there, and there's definitely a means to contact us. And then myself personally, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from anyone there. You can connect with me there. And we post a lot of these kind of little tidbits of information and tips and tricks on LinkedIn regularly. And we'd love to connect with you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being my guest today. We need to do this again, and I'm going to contact you offline because I have a lot more questions and training. So I'm actually a fan. I loved our topic today, and the information was just so valuable. And, for everybody listening, you heard it from Geoff. You'll hear it from me every show. When your restaurant's struggling, or they always cut costs and you cut advertising, and it's the worst thing you can do. You have to invest in your training, you have to invest in your people, and you have to invest in yourself as an owner, and you have to maximize the guest interaction. And the more that you do, the more revenue and the more profits and the more effective and efficient operating system you're going to have. So whatever you take away from today's show, it's the same as our last show. We talked culture, we talked training, we talked consistency, and we're saying the same words again. So, Geoff, I loved our conversation. I loved everything you said. It's totally in line with what I bring to the table every week. And, once again, thank you so much for being a guest today.
And it was a great conversation. Appreciate it. And your closing there hit the nail on the head. I agree with everything you said. So thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to hearing from you offline.
You will for sure. And for all my listeners, we love you. We can't wait to hear from you. Please reach out with new topics and any information you want to hear. And here's another great episode, and we'll see you next week. Talk to you soon.